Hi guys and friends and fans around the world, Richard here. I want to talk a little bit about microphones, specifically the difference between condenser and dynamic. And I want to tell you a little bit about where they came from, and we'll get into deep history perhaps in another video, but this one is more to kind of just talk about what I like to do and hopefully chat with you guys about your favorite microphones. I'll have to get some of you guys to come hang out on my channel and we'll face to face. You can tell me what your kind of favorite microphones are, what you like to do with them, what you record with them, so on and so forth. Think about how amazing these devices are for a second. They take sounds that we make in the real world that for the entirety of human history, up until about the last 100 years or so, even a little bit more than 100 years, but still, the entirety of human history, we had no way really to properly record our voice. Now there are old school like turnable wax drums that can be read basically like a record player, and those were kind of ways that you could get really bad recordings. But it wasn't until the 1860s that the first actual legitimate audio transducer was created, and a transducer just basically converts one thing to another, in this case acoustic signals into mechanical motion into electrical signals. That's all a microphone does. It's a transducer. It was just a little plate that vibrated, the first thing they made, and it was by a German scientist whose name I can't remember, and it would just make this garbled sound. When you would make a sound, it would react, and you couldn't get any intelligible speech out of it. Then later on in the later 1800s, Elijah Gray came along and started to work on a liquid transducer, which was basically a little vat of acid, a movable rod, a stable rod, and then when the rod would move, when you would talk, the diaphragm that was attached to it would move. And move the rod, create an electrical current, so on and so forth. Anyway, the technology kept progressing. There started to be large valve tube microphones, and they finally, I believe it was in the 30s, around that area, going into World War II, where they really started to define microphones, and especially after World War II, they started to define field effect transistors, I believe, transformers. Regardless, the FET everybody's after basically allowed us to make that giant valve circuitry smaller. We could take that signal without having to go through giant tubes and everything, and do what we want to with it. Amplify it so people could hear you over a crowd, record it, which really came into fruition thanks to Les Paul. But yeah, so anyway, without getting into all that business, let's talk about modern day condenser and dynamic microphones. I have two of my favorite examples here. I have the Bluebird condenser by Blue Microphones. I'm pretty sure everybody knows about Blue Microphones. They're one of my favorite mic companies. And this is an electro-voice Raven dynamic microphone. A dynamic microphone is usually used for louder sources or for sources that don't require super quick transient response and rugged application, I guess you could say. The main difference between these two microphones, this one has a better transient response, and you can think of transient just as a reaction time. Your condenser mics are going to have a slightly faster reaction time, and I'll explain why that is. And your dynamic mics are going to be much tougher normally. This really doesn't even need a transformer inside it. You can get signal from a microphone that has no transformer if it's a dynamic microphone. The capsule of a condenser microphone, you're not going to get anything out of unless you have basically the transformer system inside, which is an amplifier. It's a tiny amplifier to put that signal up to that low Z microphone level. A speaker has a moving coil of wire attached to this diaphragm. Blam. It goes into a magnet, and that produces the sound. As it moves, the electrical signal coming in here converts, and it moves this diaphragm. You can wire a speaker in reverse to make a microphone, which is basically the Yamaha NS10 method of recording kick drum, which I use to this day with a microphone that I built myself to record the super, super low frequency of the kick drum. It does not have fast response, so it's meant just for, catching that super low deep end as a resonance in tandem with a kick mic. Here's another dynamic microphone, the Copperhead I've been talking about a little bit lately. This is one I built for my snare. It has a speaker ripped out of an old telephone, and I have that wired up to regular XLR mic, low impedance out, and sounds great. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Mid-range sound for a mid-range drum. You get that powerful crack of the snare, and I team this up with an SM57 to get the body of the snare, and another mic on the bottom to get the high pitch crack. So really, if you're doing voiceover work, you normally would want a condenser microphone. You're going to get that little bit of extra top end clarity. And if you're recording things like guitars or drums, you really want dynamic microphones, usually with a cardioid or hypercardioid pattern, to be able to handle the high SPL, sound pressure level, and to kind of react the way you want them to. The thing about a dynamic mic is it's pretty much always going to react the way you want it to, or the way you expect it to, I should say. Whereas a condenser can kind of be all over the place. So the diaphragm in this, moving coil over a magnet attached to a very thin piece of, could be plastic or mylar or whatever they feel like attaching it to. It vibrates when your voice or any sound source goes into it, moves inside that magnetic field, creates an electrical signal, which then becomes your mic recorded signal. A condenser mic works a little bit differently. They used to be called capacitor mics because it is a capsule in there that has a flat back, normally a flat back that doesn't move, and a very thin layer, usually of mylar, coated with gold. That's why you hear the term gold sputtered diaphragm all the time, to create something that's conductive. And when that moves, that electrical field, that difference that's created, that thin piece of mylar's movement, is what creates a signal. Now it's barely there at all, so that signal has to be massively amplified, and that's why you have your transformers in your condenser microphone, and they run off of phantom power. They can be anywhere from, well, I've seen them as low as 1.5 volts. That's an electret condenser, combination of electric and magnet. That's a different story. And this one in particular runs off 48 volts, so normally up to 48 volts. There are some other microphones like the CAD Equitech that's got two 9-volt batteries inside, plus the phantom power to drive it. Very strange way to set it up, but I guess it has its uses. If I had to choose a mic to use for the rest of my life for an all-use purpose microphone, I would not choose a condenser, because if you drop a condenser, you're probably screwed because you're probably going to break it. There's a lot more circuitry inside. That diaphragm is very, very thin, so you could easily rupture it, or you could easily knock something loose and break your microphone. Whereas these mics are usually much, much simpler and more robust. Yeah, there's ribbon microphones. Some of the original early microphones were carbon microphones. Thomas Edison was a big purveyor of that and used them in a lot of his original experiments. It's basically a bunch of carbon packed into a small area, your diaphragm, and then you run an electrical signal through it, and as your voice moves the carbon granules, because it was little grains of carbon, as your voice would move those grains, it would create an electrical difference, and that difference would be your electrical signal that would be amplified into your signal. Didn't sound great, but some people actually still have some that work. They're very cool. Think those old school like War of the Worlds readings, things like that over the radio. Those were a lot of those were carbon and crystal microphones. Crystal microphones are still used widely in harmonic and things like that. They're very, tough and mid-rangey, and there were a lot of dispatch microphones in the old times as well. But so I'm rambling too much, but that's basically the difference in microphones. You get a faster transient response because that mylar diaphragm moves very, very quickly, and it can respond, and you usually have a higher top end on these condensers than you do on your dynamics. Usually they'll top out anywhere between 16 and 20 hertz, and these normally go up to 30. I think this one goes up to 30. I'm not sure. I have a lot of knowledge. I haven't got it all worked out yet into what I want to say and when I want to say it. So that's why I kind of just want to have some conversations with you guys, and we'll come up with some cool stuff. So look for a demo of this guy coming soon. You've seen this in action in several videos. When I record people's vocals, if they're just talking or singing, then I'll choose a condenser, especially a female vocal, a big airy vocal. This is a great microphone for that. If you're doing somebody who screams and growls a whole lot, you're going to want a dynamic microphone so that they don't blow it up and overdrive everything. I hope to get some of you guys in here to talk mics sometime. I love microphones. I have quite a few to play with. We'll get into ribbon mics and other fun things like that. And look for a lot of demos soon. I really don't know what else to say, so hope you guys got some information out of this video. Like, share, and subscribe and help me out. Thanks.